the 10 what we call administrative regions in Guyana. So the bottom half of the ballot paper is really for those regional elections. However, there is a provision in there's a provision that provides for geographic representation in Parliament, by which 25 of the 65 seats in Parliament come from these 10 administrative regions, and the quantum depends on the population of those regions. For example, in District 3, there will be 3 geographic seats in Parliament. In District 4, it's 7. If I may go further, at the point of allocation of seats, the first allocation is done on the basis of the regional seats. However, the representation in Parliament, which is done on proportional representation, is calculated using the total number of votes cast divided by the number of seats in Parliament. This is 65, so that will give you the quota per seat. Now, if a political party gets 6 seats in Parliament from the 65 calculation, but would have already been allocated 2 seats at the geographic level, when we take 25 from 65, there is a 40, what is referred to as the national top-up. So 6, but would have already gotten 2, so you would now get 4 out of the top-up, your 6, and 36 are there to be applied in the same manner to the other political parties.
I see. So the process for the allocation of seats is contained in what piece of legislation? Can you assist us?
I think that too is in the Election Law Amendment Act 15 of 2000. Because I think it was that act that brought in the geographic representation aspect.
Now, you told us that the ballots are separated into regional and general, and the counting begins.
Yes. So, by practice, the presiding officer will start with the general, would take the ballots, see the party for whom it is marked, would call the vote as having been cast for that party, would show the ballot to the agents who are there, and all the persons with the tally sheet would be required to place a stroke in the space provided for that. So 1 stroke in the ballot, in the tally sheet, represents a vote cast for the party, depending on how it's called.
Okay, before I take you to the tally sheet, if there is a questioned ballot, how is that addressed?
So a questioned ballot could arise because it is shown to the agents. An agent might say, for example, because the tail of an X may cross into the space provided for voting for a different party. So an agent may say, I object because that vote is not properly crossed. The presiding officer can say, but the intersection of the X is in this, is for this party that I called. But the determination of which party the ballot is cast for rests with the presiding officer. So the presiding officer will say, well, this is for the party as I called, but because an objection was raised, the ballot was questioned, there is a requirement that at the back of that ballot, a Q is marked, and that ballot is initialed by the presiding officer.
Thank you. Now, you started telling us about tally sheets, and I'm going to show you a document. I'm going to ask that you be shown a document.
May I add something to what I just said?
Sure, certainly.
The purpose of the Q is so that because the agent, through his or her party, can request for a partial recount at the level of the returning officer with reference to that ballot. So it would be easily identifiable by the queue as well as the signature of the presiding officer.
Indeed. So you told us about, you mentioned tally sheets earlier, so I'm just going to ask if you be shown a document. A document has now been placed in your hand. Would you indicate to us what that is?
This is, in fact, a specimen of the tally sheet that is being used when we conduct elections.
And what information is that tally sheet required to contain?
Well, in the first instance, it will say the region that the votes are being checked for, the division or subdivision, because polling stations are established on the basis of the number of electors in that division, which could require one polling station, or if the number of electors are too many, it will be subdivided into subdivisions. So we may have two. So the number could be for a division or subdivision. And then the parties again are listed alphabetically, and space is provided for the placement of the strokes as the ballots are being counted.
Thank you. I'm asking that this be admitted as VP1C, and I have 3 copies for the commissioners.
Yes. VP1 D.
1C.
No,
D. D.
we had one C already.
Yes.
One specimen ballot was one C. This has to be one D. This is the tally sheet.
Yes, the specimen tally sheet. Commissioners, I have this statement as VP1, the manual as VP1A,
A.
the
Yes.
ballot as VP1B. I think I had initially made an error which I corrected. And the tally sheet should be VP1C.
We have.
I believe you did.
Yes,
Yes. So this should be C.
yes,
So the specimen ballot would be VP one B.
yes. I apologize for that. It's my error.
Before we, Mr. Persaud, forgive me if I missed
It's
it
okay.
in the event that you did cover it. But when the counting process properly begins at the polling station,
Yes.
can you tell us who are the persons expected to be present?
Yes.
I don't say present,
Yes.
but expected to be present.
Yes. So it would be the staff who had been assigned to work there, that being the presiding officer, the assistant
It would
presiding
be GECOM employees.
GECOM employees, yes. The agents of political parties who would have been accredited prior to polling day, and candidates of political parties from the respective districts. There is also the police who is there to ensure security, but that police is there during the count.
Thank you.
Now, I think you had referred to a document called the Statement of Whole. If you see a specimen of such a document, will you be able to recognize it?
Yes, I will.
I'm asking that the witness be shown a document. A document has been placed in your hand, sir. Could you tell us what that document is?
Yes, this is in fact a a specimen copy of a statement of poll. This is what an actual statement of poll would look like.
And what is the use of this? What is it used for?
This basically is used to record the outcome of the counting of the votes for every polling station. There is provision for recording of the total votes cast for each political party against the name and symbol of that party. It provides for the documentation of the particulars of the polling station. It provides for party agents who would have witnessed the count to authenticate the accuracy of the information on this document by placing their signature thereon.
And do party agents have these copies of these statements of
Yes,
polls?
they do. The presiding officer is required to make enough, sufficient copies is the word used, to ensure that all those who are there are in receipt of a copy of this document.
An authenticated copy by signature.
Yes, but it's not compulsory that they sign. They can refuse to sign. But the agents can refuse to sign, but the presiding officer must sign.
Now, you say that they receive copies. Is this carbon copy or photocopies?
Well, these things are produced as pre-carbonated. But at the commission we refer to all of the copies as original copies.
I see. So is it correct to say that party agents would have original copies of statements of polls?
Poll, yes.
And just so that I could move us along a little bit, do you refer to statements of polls as SOPs?
Yes, we do.
After the votes, I'm sorry, let me ask that this be admitted and marked as VP1D, and I have 3 copies for the commissioners.
Okay. While that's being tendered, may I ask, on going back to the tally sheet, clearly this is the tally sheet is what the presiding officer works off in counting. Are party agents also supplied with these tally sheets?
Yes, yeah.
So everybody is working off
Yes.
same
Yes.
tally sheet.
Yes.
Yes. Tally sheet is admitted into evidence as
Statement.
statement. Sorry.
Yes. Commissioner,
VP1D.
at this point, I need to ask your indulgence because members of the public looking on are not able to see these exhibits. So we have them scanned and we are asking for the opportunity to have them put up on the screen. So very quickly, the documents will be viewed by those looking on.
Certainly.
It's on? Okay, Q, could you just go on what, I don't know what you're saying. So could you let me know when it's no, one that is. I'm just making sure that they are able to see and it's scrolled down
There
properly.
seems to be concerns at the back.
Thank you. I believe that the exhibits have been made visible to those looking on. So let's continue, Mr. Persaud. After the ballots are counted, that's to say after people have cast their votes and the ballots have been counted at the polling stations, what becomes of them?
They are placed in designated envelopes. The ballot, there's a separate envelope for general ballot, there's a separate for regional ballots, there is a separate envelope for spoiled ballots, and these are all placed in their respective envelopes and sealed and put aside so that at the point of putting back everything in the ballot box, they will go in there and the box is sealed.
And the boxes are resealed.
Yes.
Now, when you say sealed, tell us what that means.
So sealing as the thing we produce at every stage where the ballot box is required to be sealed, we provide the presiding officers with differently identifiable seals, and all of these seals are numbered so that there is a record from the point of where we place them in the ballot box at the central packing point to the polling station. So there will be a set of seals that would have been in the box that the presiding officer used to reseal the ballot
Certainly.
box.
And you told us that the envelopes are also sealed.
Yes.
Is there only one seal on the envelope?
So we provide, for sealing purposes of envelopes, we provide the traditional wax seal
Sure.
that we also put in the box. The presiding officer is provided with match and candles to use to melt the wax on the part of the envelope where the fold goes, and then every presiding officer has a stamp which we call the PO seal, carries the initials, the letters PO, to place on that seal, authenticating that it was sealed by the presiding officer.
Now this might sound like a bit of an obvious question, but I need to ask it. What do these envelopes look like?
They're regular brown envelopes, only that they're labeled specifically as is required.
Sure. And apart from the presiding officer, is anyone else entitled to place any sort of seal on that brown envelope?
Yes, the party agents are permitted to do so if they so desire.
After the ballots which have been cast have been returned to the ballot boxes and the ballot boxes have been sealed, what is the next step?
So before we even go there, I must mention also that the party agents are also allowed to put seals on the ballot box in addition to the GECOM seals.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
well, even before we reach to the stage of what we do with the ballot boxes, in preparing the statements of poll, the presiding officer is required to prepare two separate statements of poll for that polling station. One to be delivered to the returning officer, the envelope would be so marked. One to be delivered to the chief election officer, the envelope would be so marked. Those two envelopes are in the possession of the presiding officer, whose responsibility it is to ensure that those envelopes and the ballot box is delivered to the returning officer. The delivery of the ballot boxes, there is a legal provision for party agents to accompany the movement of the ballot boxes, and usually GECOM make provision for the movement.
In the ballot box, the only documents that are placed in the ballot box are the marked ballots.
No. The marked ballots, the unmarked ballots which might have been remaining, which were unused ballots, spoiled ballots, rejected ballots, and those type of things go into that.
In separate
In separate envelopes. the
No.
mark lists that were used by the presiding officer goes into that ballot.
No statutorily required document is placed in that box.
As in, if you mean in this case statement of poll, the answer is no. Because the ballot is a statutory document they use.
Now, we touched on the description of an official called a returning officer. Who is a returning officer?
The returning officer is the person who has been appointed by GECOM and who has taken an oath of office to be responsible for the conduct of elections in a particular, well, we call them electoral districts, but it's for an administrative region also. Electoral districts and administrative regions are really amongst the same.
And who is a deputy returning officer?
So a deputy returning officer is appointed to assist the returning officer with carrying out his duties in the particular district. Usually a deputy returning officer would be assigned responsibilities more administrative than other for a particular geographic area, but more so for what we call a cluster of polling stations.
Sure. And in the absence of a returning officer, let's say in some unforeseen circumstances, is a deputy returning officer able to do what he does?
Well, not necessarily, because what the provision is that if a returning officer is unable to carry out the functions of that office, it is the clerk to the returning officer that assumes the responsibility of the returning officer. Deputy returning officers are assigned specific responsibilities.
But could you clarify for me? Let's say in a particular district, will you only have one returning officer?
Yes.
And how do you determine how many deputy returning officers there are for each particular district?
That would depend on the division or separation of the number of polling stations. So, and we do this really to ensure that administratively we can ensure that all polling stations are properly prepared and maintained for the conduct of the poll.
Okay. And are you able to say, you are now the CEO of GECOM, so are you able to say in the 2020 elections, who was the returning officer for District 4?
Yes.
Who was-
His name is Claremont Mingo.
And had you known Mr. Mingo before?
Yes, I have.
And prior to that, how long had you known him?
Well, I've known Mr. Mingo, I think, since around 2006, up to the point of my departure from GECOM in 2017.
Sure. Now, are you able to tell us, as CEO, I take it that you are responsible for the records of GECOM.
Yes.
So are you able to tell us for the 2020 elections how many district, I beg your pardon, deputy returning officers had been appointed for District 4?
I think it might have been in the 90s, the number of deputy returning officers. We're talking about deputy returning officers?
Yes.
Yes, it would be, I think, a bit above 90 deputy returning officers.
Right. Now, does a deputy returning officer have the power to assist with the counting in any district?
Not without such authority having been given to him or her by the returning officer. And only in the presence of the returning officer
Yes.
and the other persons authorized to be there.
Sure. What is an election return? Could you explain that to us?
Yes, an election return is a statutory form. It's numbered. It's Form 24 that is provided for in the Representation of the People Act, that is used by the returning officer to record the results of the elections for the particular district.
And the information which informs that return comes from the statements of poll.
Yes, that's the only place it can come from.
After a returning officer has, well, is it correct to say that it is only after the counting is concluded that the statements, the numbers on the statements of poll are added up?
So this is taking us back to the polling station, because that's where the votes are counted.
Yes.
Yes.
And the statement, the numbers on the statements of poll are what are used to determine what appears on the election return, correct?
Yes.
So, is it correct to say that if you have incomplete statements of polls, there should be no election return?
Well, you cannot reach the point of preparing that statement of poll, that return, if you have an incomplete or an improper or incorrect statement of poll.
Certainly. And after the return is done, is there a declaration?
Yes, there is.
Who does such a declaration?
The returning officer is required to make a public declaration using the information on the Form 24,
And
the
when you-
election return.
Right. And the election return must reflect the totals contained in the statements of poll.
The totals for the region as derived from the statements of poll.
Is there anything which allows a returning officer to make a declaration where the counting has not been completed and the statements of polls have not been tallied up?
No, there's no such provision.
After the declaration, if any party disagrees with the declaration or what has been said, is there a procedure to be followed?
Yes, there is provision for the agent of a party who may have concerns pertaining to the declaration to request a recount. It could be a partial recount or a total recount of the ballots for the region, but such a request must be submitted to the returning officer no later than 12 o'clock on the day after the declaration is made.
And does this request have to be in any particular form?
Well, there's no standard form. It could be a simple letter requesting the recount.
Let's step back a little bit to the declaration. After a returning officer makes a declaration for a particular district, what if anything is the returning officer required to do?
The returning officer, having made his declaration, is required to take the completed election return to the chief election officer.
And this is, I take it, this is after you have declared results from, what number was it? 10 returning officers, the number you gave us?
So
10 returning officers?
yeah, there are 10 returning officers, but each of them is required to take their respective election return to the chief election officer.
And what is the chief election officer then required to do in turn?
The chief election officer is required to use those returns to compile the results for the entire country and to submit his collation of those results in manual, it's called, in the written form, as well as in an electronic form to the commission for declaration.
Can you tell us in 2020 who were the members of the commission?
The same members who are there now. The chairman is retired Justice of Appeal Claudette Singh. The commissioners nominated by the current opposition are Commissioner Vincent Alexander, Commissioner Desmond Trotman, and Commissioner Charles Corbin. The commissioners who have been, yes, the commissioners who have been nominated by the People's Progressive.
Is the witness going to quickly?
Corbin.
Corbin, C-O-R-B-I-N.
On the PPP side, those nominated are Mr. C.S. Gunraj, Mr. Manoj Narayan, and Mr. Clement Rohi.
How do you spell Mr. Rohi's surname?
Rohee.
And are you familiar with Mrs. Bibi Shadiq?
Yes.
And was Mrs. Shadiq not a commissioner in 2020?
Oh, yes, she was. Regrettably, she is deceased and was replaced by Mr. Rohi.
Thank you. Now, are the final results for the elections gazetted?
Yes, they have to be.
And whose responsibility is that?
The chief election officer under the instructions of the commission.
Now, before we round off your evidence, you told us that you had known Mr. Mingo for many years and that he was the registration officer. I beg your pardon, he was the returning officer for District 4 in 2020.
Yes, but we had no relationship with that engagement that he had.
Understood. During the period of time that you had known him when you were at GECOM, well, what did he do? What was his job at the time? Can you recall?
Yes, Mr. Ming. So we have Guyana divided into registration areas that are responsible for defined geographic areas. Mr. Mingo was responsible for a portion of region number 5, and we call his area of responsibility the Fort Wellington registration area.
And what would he be doing as part of his job?
Mr. Mingo was responsible for the registration of persons from within that registration area under the National Registration Act.
I forgot to ask you this. In 2020, who was the chief election officer? That's to say, for the general election.
To my knowledge, it was Mr. Keith Lowenfield.
And who was the deputy chief election officer?
I think her name was Miss Roxanne Myers.
And do Mr. Lowenfield and Miss Myers still work for GECOM?
No, they do not.
Can you recall when their relationship or their employment with GECOM ended?
Not with specific dates, but it would have been somewhere around June, July of 2021.
Were they terminated from their positions?
I think their contracts would have been, there's a clause in the contracts of the employment contracts of all GECOM employees that allows for termination on the basis of either party giving 3 months notice or payment in lieu of notice. I think that clause was used to part company with both Mr. Lowenfield and Ms. Myers. But my knowledge is based on what I read in the media. I was not at GECOM.
Sure, well, only tell us about what you know.
Yes.
Okay? So, are you familiar with the name Robeson Ben? B-E-N-N?
Yes, I am.
And was Mr. Ben a commissioner?
Yes. He would have been a commissioner at the time of the 2020 elections.
Okay. So, was he then replaced by anyone?
I think Mr. Ben was replaced by Mr. Manoj Narayan.
Thank you. Are you familiar with the name Enrique Livan, L-I-V-A-N?
I'm familiar with the name, but not the person. I know of Enrique Livan having been, well, he continues to be an employee of GECOM.
In 2020, or in March 2020, for the general election, where was the counting done for District 4?
Based on my knowledge, that was done at the office of the returning officer, which was located in what we call the Ashman's building at Hadfield and High Streets. I believe that would be Working Rust. The
Sure.
area is called Working Rust.
And is that the same building which now houses GECOM headquarters?
No.
I want to ask you a little bit about security at GECOM. Now, you told us that you are responsible for all the records kept at GECOM. So, would you also be responsible for materials such as security footage, let us say?
I would have to have knowledge at least as to where it is stored.
Sure. And in relation to the elections or what occurred or what may have occurred in March 2020 at Ashman's building, are you able to say whether there is any security footage available?
No, I am not aware that any such footage is available. In fact, I did inquire. I was informed that the cameras were installed in that building on the instructions of the chief election officer. That might have been done by a private service provider. Nobody seems to know when the cameras were removed nor where the footage might be. And in terms of records, may I venture that when I assumed office in the office of the chief election officer, where the computers which should have had information or could have had information in that regard, all of the computers were wiped clean.
Thank you. And final bit of information which I want to elicit from you, Sue. Who is responsible for disciplining GECOM staff?
The Elections Commission.
Thank you. Subject to any questions which the commissioners may have for you, sir, these are my questions, please.
So you said that the Form 24 returns are submitted to the Chief Elections Officer. Who does what with them?
The Chief Election Officer is required to use the information from those forms to collate the results for the entire country. In the first place, that collation is done for the national elections and for the then for the regional elections. And those results he must present to the Commission for declaration. It is the Commission that is responsible for the declaration of the results.
So his collation effort is submitted to the Commission.
Yes.
And can I ask you, does the chief elections officer, in that exercise of collating the information, does the chief elections officer have any discretion to alter, to delete, to ignore any of the information contained in the Form 24 return?
None whatsoever to my knowledge, and I must confess, I went back, I reviewed that section before I came to this meeting and this hearing, and there is no such provision.
Do you have a copy of the report?
I do not have one with me, but I can have one made available.
Mr. Persaud, you said the actual accounting takes place in the voting station. So when you said counting for District 4 was conducted at the Ashland facility?
Actually, that wasn't counting. That was the collation.
That confused me because you said,
yes.
you said counting for District 4 was conducted at the Ashland.
Yes.
So just so I understand this process, District 4 had how many floors?
I think it might have been 879, but it might vary one or two. But that's the figure in my head. 879 polling stations for District 4.
And each one of those voting stations has a polling officer in there?
A presiding officer.
Presiding officer.
Yes.
Who is then overseen by the returning officer?
Yes.
So counting for those 879 taking place in a separate and distinct station.
Yes.
And the process you described of the sealing of the box and packaging, those will all have occurred in those separate.
Respectively, yes.
And when the boxes are sealed, they're transported to a particular place.
Yes, designated. What we have done for easy access, we would have established points where we place containers with all required security, that the presiding officer will take the box and ensure that it's properly handed over and stored in the container.
And this ends up where? At the returning officer?
Eventually, because the entire district is considered to be under the jurisdiction of the returning officer, so he has control over that container. But it doesn't require that we move that container from there to the office of the returning officer. Then retrieval takes place to come back to the central secretariat. So what we would do for logistical reasons, pick up the containers from their respective positions, and I must say that usually a deputy returning officer is placed at the point where every container is and has supervisory responsibilities for those containers.
So absent any complaints or controversy, a returning officer is expected to receive in his hands statements of report from the respective posts.
Yes.
And with that, he uses that to prepare the form.
Yes. Yes.
Just arising out of one of the Honorable Commissioner's questions, may I just ask this witness one other thing? So, could you describe for us what is tabulation in the electoral process?
So tabulation is what is done at the office of the returning officer, using the different statements of poll, taking the results as documented in the statements of poll by political party to bring all together to arrive at the total for the region for each of the contestants.
Thank you. And these are my questions.
Thank you very much.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you, too.
Mike, can you release?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Much obliged.
Now taking away break.